Recording in progress, Zoom says. So welcome everybody to our Q&A session with William Kelley, version 2.0. And he has just finished dinner. He has a glass of wine, toddler toys in the background. There may be a toddler head or two you get to see as well. And his lovely wife brought him water at my request because we parents know things like that. Get your water as well as your wine. And so the way we're going to run this today is mostly Q&A. He's willing to answer kind of any questions you have, but we talked briefly just before this about something he wants to talk about, and I think it's a freaking brilliant subject matter and kind of funny because William has this, I guess it's not really permission. You don't like to be locked down, I think is what you said it was. And so I think you're all going to love this subject matter. And then what we'll do after, and I'll remind everybody of this, is we're going to do, you can ask questions in the chat after. Let's let him talk first, but or we can raise your hand. I'd rather have you guys speak one-on-one with him because we don't have too many, given it's a work day, you know, middle of the work day for everybody. So I'd rather have you chat one-on-one with him. So if you do a raise your hand thing, I can see those in order. And I'll be able to call upon you and unmute you and get you going directly with the boss himself. So I will mute myself, and William, give me that. Let's rehash that story you were saying about what you want to talk about a bit.
Okay, sure. Yeah, well, I just wanted to say, I suppose, a few words about the latest chapter in my professional adventure, which is taking over Bordeaux while still reviewing Burgundy and Champagne. And it's really fascinating to have this sort of perspective of the contrasts and commonalities between the two regions. It's not something that many people, certainly people in the business have, because merchants often specialize in one or the other. Producers in Bordeaux know, generally speaking, with some exceptions, very little about Burgundy, and Burgundians, generally speaking, even less about Bordeaux. So it's really fascinating to be spending a lot of time in both places, living in Burgundy and then making these regular trips. I spent so far this year, 7 weeks in Bordeaux rather. So a long time, a lot of miles on the road and a lot of chateau visits. What are the big contrasts? I think one of the things is the extent to which Bordeaux is sort of rather poorly covered by the press, or sort of poorly understood by consumers today, because in the last, maybe since around about 2000, 2005, there's been this very impressive agronomic revolution going on in terms of the quality of the way the vineyards are farmed. People understood that it's nice to have a pretty winery, and there's still a lot of that, that will invest in the winery rather than the vineyards. But a lot of sensible people also understood that you needed better grapes to make better wine. And so the vineyards now, compared to, when I last spent a lot of time in Bordeaux, which is in the early 2010s, much better maintained. I know a lot more about farming now, of course, as well, so I can really appreciate it. So that's really interesting, and I think the sort of agronomic side, the farming side of Burgundy, is much better foregrounded by the press and talked about perhaps a bit more firsthand by the growers, because in Burgundy you're often meeting with the people who actually farm the vineyards. In Bordeaux, there are a lot of different layers between the guy I meet as a critic often and the people who actually farm and actually make the wine, frankly, So this is something I think is underappreciated. That's exciting. There's just as much interesting viticulture going on in Bordeaux today, almost as in Burgundy, not quite, but almost. And it's worth talking about it. I mean, I think it would make the wine seem a lot more real to people, a lot more authentic, a lot more interesting if people who knew a bit more about that. The other aspect that I think is really exciting in Bordeaux at the moment is sort of technical progress in terms of people really thinking about, since 2010, really thinking about how to better match barrels to wine, to reduce that sort of gratuitous oak impact, to maybe rack less. When you're working with rather ripe, less reductive fruit, how to work in a more or less more oxidative fruit, how to work in a more reductive way in the winery, essentially to protect the wines, keep freshness, so you don't, you have rather ripe grapes often, many vintages in Bordeaux now. How do you avoid losing that fruit and being left with something that's sort of raisiny and very oaky? So it comes down to choices of barrels, how you rack, how often you rack, technical stuff, how you bottle, And there's a lot of work that's been going on with that, which I think explains why when you open the 2019 Bordeaux today, there's a sort of freshness and, French would say éclat, explosiveness to the fruit, vibrancy to the fruit, even though working with rather ripe grapes, as in 9 and 10, that you don't always find in 9s and 10s today. A lot of those wines evolved a bit faster than we expected them. So that's kind of interesting. Other big contrast is cultural, because Burgundy were meeting a lot of proprietor producers, whereas in Bordeaux, it's rarely you're rarely meeting the person who makes the wine is rarely the owner. Let's say there are some exceptions to that, but especially at the top chateau, the top 150 chateau, that's seldom the case. And so you don't have, in a sense, you don't have the sort of romantic notion of the sort of peasant proprietor making the wine and with no with no one to answer to. But what you do have is you have a very passionate cadre of professionals who weren't born into viticulture or winemaking necessarily, who chose that career through passion, and who are remarkably serious about their jobs. And the flip side of the romantic aspect of Burgundy we have is also the fact that passion isn't always hereditary. And in Burgundy, I see a lot of people who sort of almost these very valuable domains become sort of albatrosses around their necks, engendering all sorts of sort of sibling conflict due to inheritance and values and having to deal with shareholders and things like that. And maybe they're not even that passionate about work. There's some great exceptions to that where families have been able to pass on passion, like the Koch family, for example. But there may be more exceptions than the rules. So that's been interesting. And I think that's another sort of aspect of Bordeaux that is underappreciated. Now, it has a really unfortunate flip side in a sense, is that a lot of these guys are dependent on, that they have corporate jobs. It's corporations, these big shadow corporations, and corporate jobs come with KPIs, which some of us may have the misfortune to know about. And often part of the KPIs are probably, I suspect, at least, clearly their performance is to some extent measured against scores. Now, I'm 32 years old, anybody of my age coming to wine criticism today and reviewing a region, whether it be Bordeaux or Napa, or I would venture the Rhone Valley, is inheriting a broken system, and the 100-point system, or a system that has been pushed to its limits, has been devalued by score compression and inflation to such an extent that it's almost impossible to say anything meaningful about the wines using points. And some people are opposed to scoring wines with points on principle. Fine, I can see your point. It's a rather arid philosophical discussion in my view, so we won't get into that. But if you're going to do it, it has to be meaningful. And in my view, it's a very useful instrument to be able to precisely differentiate preference of the reviewer for readers in a way that admits of no equivocation. So I think it is very valuable, but if it's an instrument that's to be useful, it can't be blunted, and it's been blunted by compression inflation. And so you have these state directors and relations directors, whatever, who are all dependent on the scores for their job, and the proprietors often don't really understand how it works. And so I'm in an awkward situation of trying to recalibrate things. And having these sort of conversations with people. I had a conversation with a top group class A director the other day. I gave 96 plus to his wine. And he said, "Oh, so you don't like my wine?" What sort of crazy universe are we living in where 96 plus is considered a bad score? I said, I've given 96 plus to the Grands Reserve to Mendes Conti, and but Villaine never complained. And I think the wine sells for a little bit more than yours, perhaps, but I don't know. But he didn't laugh, So these guys are obsessed by scores. In fact, they don't dare to do it too much with me, because the power of the advocate is sort of protects me to some extent. And I think we're in fact the only publication that can undertake some sort of recalibration and can say, that something needs to be done about it, because I've seen some of the messages that sort of colleagues who have blogs or whatever have received from Chateau, which are very offensive personal denunciations of their ability as tasters, general comprehension of wine, and even sort of moral rectitude. I mean, really quite unpleasant insinuations made, often emails sent early in the morning or late at night, of course, as happens with things like this. So for me, this is a real crisis point for the credibility of wine criticism. And I was very fortunate, in fact, to take a Burgundy champagne which were regions where the scoring system hadn't been abused. In fact, I think in some ways it was too conservative because, the only champagnes that anyone might consider giving 100 points to were Krug and Salon, and the only Burgundies were Romanée-Conti and Musigny, and I've tried to change that up a bit. So in some ways, I had the luxury in those regions of being able to give the highest score to the wines I liked of any critic, and the lowest score to the wines I didn't. And thus my preference is at least very clear to readers, and they can take them or leave them, of course, but I like to put my cards on the table very explicitly. Bordeaux, I find myself in this sort of perverse position of giving scores that I consider high to wines and finding that I'm the lowest. I can't go high. It's impossible to go high because there are these publications around that are just spewing out, and even French ones. It's not just James Suckling, who of course we all know about, and has become a sort of industry joke for his scores. A very nice gentleman, I think, in many respects, and actually a rather good taste. Certainly not the worst of people reviewing Bordeaux, but obviously the notes are ludicrous. And I think it's really unfortunate. Also, the chateaus sort of suck this up and embrace it for the most part, out of pure, sort of pure mercenariness. And will repost these sort of ludicrous notes. You see sort of, a Cru Bourgeois from Listrac proclaiming that it got 96 points in 2021, which has a vintage that I've made clear in my report, has a lot of merits, a lot of interest. But the idea that you get 96 points in 2021, what do you get? You get 98 points for your Listrac Cru Bourgeois in a great vintage. And then where does that leave Chateau de Tours? I mean, it's impossible to. That's at that point. There's no point scoring the wines, and the premise of the Chateau sharing these things, and of course of these sort of so-called critical review publications providing this content, is that the consumer is an idiot. The whole thing is founded on absolute contempt for the consumer, which I think is actually a really bad judgment call. I think people who spend quite a lot of money, increasingly large sums of money on fine wine, are generally quite intelligent and so I think it's a really bad long-term investment. And so in a sense, Bordeaux is this region which its entire reputation is founded on the long term, on wines that can live for almost forever, for all intents and purposes forever, for our lifetimes, which is what forever really means. And yet they're incredibly short-termist about some of these subjects. So it's a bit of it's a challenge and it's a bit of a battle, but also I think people in the trade and a lot of consumers have been very responsive. So I think actually a lot of chateau owners, it smarts a bit when you've been used to getting sort of 97, 98 to get 94, 95. But all I've done so far is to take the clock back to maybe how things were in 2010, obviously with slightly different stylistic preferences for Robert Park in that period. But at a similar sort of level, I look back, I've saw some of the chateaux that have complained about their scores for 2021. They have received the score that they received for the barrel sample of 2010. I mean, come on. So what's happened in the last decade? And that's really what we're trying. My big personal professional challenge at the moment, in addition to sort of keeping up with everything in Burgundy, and indeed covering new ground in Burgundy and Champagne, is to really sort of take on this sort of monster, and I hope we can get somewhere interesting and get people habituated to something a bit more sane. So that's my little thought. And these sort of petulant complaints about scores that are not low enough, combined with a sort of an absolute willingness to bend over for any amount of to any extent in order to receive worthless praise. And I think that's sad. I think it does the region no credit, but this is what happened. What happened since the mid 80s is that the entire model for selling Bordeaux wines, oriented itself around scores. And if you live by the sword, you're liable to die by the sword. So it's I don't know. I think it's a rather sorry state of affairs, but I'm hopeful that we can come out of it, and that we can focus, instead of on such petty matters, think more about the quality of the wines, their enduring value over time, the fascinating variety of expressions and sites that the region can offer, which clearly. It's a pity, because Bordeaux is so good at marketing on one sense, but it's also alienated in some ways a lot of really serious wine drinkers. And there's a lot of interesting wine there for sure. I've got some in my glass tonight.
I'm going to flex that I have the only other one unmuted at this point, but now's the time for people to start raising your hand. I got a couple of questions first, but to do so, just go to your reactions and there's a little button that says raise hand. I'll call on people from there. And then I'll ask you to unmute yourself and then you present your question. I have some. One is, you first referred to, you were again praising Burgundy in yet another way, which, we don't need any more of that. Most of us can't afford Burgundy in the market as it is now. But there's nothing but constant praise for it at all times. It's like, it's gotten so frustrating, and it's such a limitation based on the land. They can't grow more grapes. It's that part. I guess they're changing some of the grapes planted a little bit, but they're not expanding the region at all. Bordeaux seems to have a much greater land mass, ability to grow grapes, so they have more wine to produce, do they not?
I mean, I think there's no question that for the world of expensive wine, let's say, I use the expression fine wine earlier. I don't really like that expression. It's expensive wine. That's what fine wine means. The world of expensive wine, there I go, needs to be balanced, needs Bordeaux to fulfill its historic place, which is supplying a lot of drinkers with a lot of very serious wine. And a lot of pressure has been on Burgundy lately, and it's certainly showing. Bordeaux needs to take up some of the slack, in my view, and I think it absolutely can. I really, if people actually start talking about the sites, the techniques, the methods, the people will be re-energized by this region. And the wines are selling very well off the back of, at the moment, off the back of the very well priced 19s. But I'm afraid that 2021s are going to be too expensive and kill that momentum. So we'll see what happens. No, but I somewhat disagree in the sense that I think there's it's interesting. You look at an appellation like Saint-Emilion, there's some fantastic terroir in Saint-Emilion, but there are also some places that are not really fit to grow anything more than carrots or asparagus. The appellations, the communal appellations, at least in Bordeaux, are much more rigorously delimited, and I wouldn't say that there's in Saint-Emilion there's some genuinely bad terroir along with some profound terroir. In somewhere like Volnay or Chambord, there's nowhere bad to make wine. You can make very, very, very good wine at every level, and this is also true of places that are only entitled to generic appellations in the Côte Chalonnaise, and also the Côte Chalonnaise communal and premier cru appellations. So there's a lot of I think, I mean, if you imagine if everyone in Rouy made wine on the level of Vincent Duroy-Gentillard, and if everyone in Macuret made wine on the level of Bruno Laurenceau, and so on, there's still a lot that can be done in Burgundy to create more great wine, and I hope to, rather than fixating on sort of reviewing the cult stuff, which is fun to do. It's fun to go to visit all these people and to drink their wines and to taste their wines and to get to know them, over the years. But I also, I mean, I'm just about to sort of launch into the usual sort of flurry of, I mean, I've got new producers in the Chalonnaise, new producers in the Mâconnais, Chablis, and Irancy to visit in the coming weeks. And, there's interesting stuff, and some of it's dirt cheap. But it's true that, Bordeaux is this great reservoir of wine, and a lot of it very high quality. My gosh, anyone who bought 2019 Primeurs and bought intelligently, you got some crazy bargains. I mean, I remember getting Longueur Barton for less than €30 a bottle, things like that. And I just stocked up huge. I think I must have over 300 bottles of 2019 Bordeaux now.
Jeez.
And I'm still trying to buy it, because also, I'm conscious I'm 32. I want to drink, if I want to drink the 19s the same state of maturity that the 82s are today, which I find very agreeable, I'm going to be 70. So, I should start buying more older wine already, even at 32, which is, it's important. You have to reflect on your mortality when you're buying wine. So,
wow. Okay.
I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it did. I mean, I would, the accessibility of Burgundy is obviously, we've had private discussions about this. It's fine for you because of where you're located. It's a little, and that's where, like you said, with Bordeaux is so good at marketing. That's definitely what they've done. They've created this, as flawed as the system is, many people think. Yeah. They have a worldwide system in place where you can access cheap chateau, and you have access to everything in between, all the way, everything. Yeah. And the Place de Bordeaux, everyone likes to criticize it, but the Place de Bordeaux is actually, in some ways, a great solution, because you right now what's being tested is the allocation model in Burgundy. I mean, I saw a question like that. I didn't see exactly what it is about annulation pricing, but what do you do when you're annulation and the market price is
tripling every 6 months, how do you price those wines? You know, and at a certain point, the price becomes so high that it generates enormous centripetal force on the wine in people's cellars. You know, and they're just tempted to sell. They didn't buy with the intention of selling, but when the Bourgogne that you bought for 50 euros retail, or 25 or whatever, is like worth 600-700. It's just Bourgogne. I mean, it's very nice wine. What do? So we're, at least what the Person Bordeaux does is totally soulless, but it says, you know, the market price is 600. We're going to get you 600 minus 15%, which we're going to take. And the shadow just, you know, they wash their hands of it and it's done. So it's quite efficient in terms of extracting what people are willing to pay from them for the wines, and distributing them globally with minimal employees to deal with logistics at the estates. It's actually quite an effective system. And I wonder, I mean, I don't know, I'm almost wonder, I think the cultural clash is too big for any Burgundy estate to envisage putting its wine on the Place de Bordeaux, but you could almost imagine it as a solution to this sort of nightmare of dealing with allocations.
But then the problem comes in the reason why they're saying to you with your 96 points, oh, you don't like my wine, because their pricing is based purely on what the rating is. So vintages to some extent,
they
yes,
haven't,
but it's all about the rating. So the same wine could cost, there could be a vector of 50% from one vintage to the other based just on the rating. So same wine.
But what they need to understand is that that's not sustainable, and consumers are not stupid. The consumers are already developing serious score fatigue, and the average critical rating is almost invariably higher than the average cellar tracker rating of people who actually paid money to drink the wine and then appraised it. That for me is worrying. You know, if your consumers think that your 96 is worth their 92, well, at what point do they think, well, maybe you're just an idiot, or you don't know what you're doing, or you're essentially to, and you know, everyone talks about sort of corruption and conflicts of interest. I don't think it's that. I think actually just most wine critics sort of want to be loved. It's a big burden to take on, to have, you know, you want people to be happy to see you. You give someone a high score, they're happy to see you. You know, life is good. They open bottles and so on. I have voluntarily renounced that in Bordeaux, and have taken upon, you know, upon my shoulders the willingness to sort of have a lot of sour expressions, and people coming and sort of stamping their feet. Even I've had people stamping their feet at me. I find it risible,
literally stamp their feet.
Even I venture, you know, and it does nothing for me. But a lot of people would want to avoid. I would never willingly seek out those encounters, those sorts of human interactions, but I'm obligated to if I'm to do my job and with any degree of what I consider to be seriousness. And if it doesn't work, I'll do something else. So
yeah, and you mentioned the score compression, and that's so common now. It seems to be at this point like a 6-point scale. You know, the 100-point scale is 6 points. There we go. Hey, buddy, look at that towhead. Look at that blonde hair. Mommy, huh?
Absolutely, yeah, happily.
Which ties into my next question. You said you touched briefly on maybe there's an opportunity, maybe Michelin allows for an opportunity to change the scoring completely, and you guys go with a Michelin type scoring. Is that something that?
No, and I have no volition to do that. But they do understand that you can't give 3 stars to all the restaurants and still have people come read your guide. Yeah. You know, which is very helpful, and it's an obvious comparison. You have to, the whole point of criticism is to be critical and to be able to discriminate between fine shades of excellence and also mediocrity. And when you're too worried about, you know, people having hissy fits because they got 93 points or something, you just can't. You're not being critical anymore. So yeah, and the great advantage of all these Bordeaux wines, you know, I mean, unless I sort of get myself banned from Le Fleur or Petrus or something like that. I mean, even that. It can all of it can be purchased.
How the heck? No, there's no way. That's the advantage you have, though, is the power of both names, Wine Advocate and Michelin. You know, it's going to be damn near impossible for them to ban you from showing up. So if there ever is a moment or an opportunity to maybe shake things up truly and get rid of this score compression, you kind of have a unique opportunity possibly.
I think we owe it to Bordeaux to do it, you know. No, I think people could try to ban me. I don't see that that's impossible. But I just buy the wines and I review the wines. I mean, no.
It's a hell of a lot more unlikely. because you're not fully independent like some of the other ones are. So to
right,
wine
yeah.
advocate and
I don't even know.
as its parent is really tough.
I mean, I don't even know how much our readers care if one or two estates aren't reviewed because they ban me. I don't actually think they care. I think the Chateau have sort of a lot of. I mean, there are a lot of Chateau that historically had rather minor reputations that were made into sort of big deals in the marketplace by wine advocate scores. That now sort of think that that's who they are. And I don't know. I'd be interested to see how they fare without any reviews. I mean, it could be interesting to see. Of course, if they have a great connection and with their clientele and a durable brand that's been built up by working the market, that's great. But if their reputation is actually just based on points, it's going to be tricky without points, I think. But I don't know. But we can see. But they may want to find out. And we'll see what happens. It wouldn't surprise me if it happened because, but by and large, I also have a lot of people who are very positive about it. I mean, there was one estate where I had I wouldn't describe it as a harangue, but a sort of slightly tense interview with the proprietor, who then stepped out of the room. And while they were out of the room, the winemaker turned to me and said, "Thank you for reviewing the wines and not the labels." The actual guy who actually makes the wine, when their boss was out of the room. I mean, so what could you do? And it was moments like that made me say, yes, I'm only going to get worse, from the point of view of
maybe there's hope in the market then, so this compression goes away because it's not helpful. I mean, it's not helpful.
And the idea is also to liberate. It's far from being the idea to impose my taste on people. The idea is to liberate people from feeling that they have to make a particular style of wine to get scores. I think I'm actually quite in sympathy with general trend, stylistic trend in contemporary Bordeaux, which is to make rather more balanced, vibrant, elegant, structurally elegant wines that still have a lot of intensity and concentration of flavor. That's if I had to encapsulate my taste crudely, it would be that, and this is founded on deep experience with old wines from Bordeaux, back in terms of extensive experience back to the wines of the 1920s. This is what Bordeaux, in my view, has been good at over time historically. I think that's what there are a lot of producers who want to do that. You already look. I mean, you look at who's making monster truck wines in Saint Emilia. I call it the shock and awe style of winemaking. There are only 3 or 4, really making these sort of things that stain your real glass so deep that you have to replace it with an ever more expensive. Don't put in one of those Swan decanters because you'll never get some of that stuff out. And all these guys have super white teeth. It's remarkable. They make these very black wines that have very white teeth, which I find. Are they drinking the wine? They're probably not.
Investing heavily in whitening, in teeth whitening.
I had a bit of a dispute with the commercial director of one such chateau, who I told him the wine was actually undrinkable, and I thought my reviewer had been quite kind. And he said, "It's just not possible to say such a thing." And I said, "Well, you drink a bottle of it on video, and you send me the video, and I'll believe you can drink it." But I mean, it's just some of these wines are physically undrinkable. I've never seen, there's sort of wines that you have open at a group, with a dozen people. And it's only a third of it's gone by the end of the evening. It's that sort of wine. That's the sort of wine I don't like.
Yeah,
I like the sort of. I don't like the sort of wine people don't drink.
Yeah, black and syrupy, not really a thing for many of us. For any of us, actually.
Yeah, but it's fish. And look, syrupy. I can understand the appeal of. I mean, it's sort of hardwired into our lizard brain, isn't it? The appeal of the sweetness, of sucrosity.
Yeah.
But what I don't understand, what I find perplexing, I think is only explicable as appealing to people with sort of deadened palates, is this sort of extremely bitter, mouth puckering levels of tannin extraction, which I think that's impactful. And this is another part of what I've been trying to do. I make a point of not tasting more than 70, 75 wines a day. That may seem like a lot, but a lot of people out there, I can assure you, are doing 200 plus a day. And the first thing you lose is your perception of any kind of sort of structural finesse or balance. Balance is not an ingredient in wine. It's not like you can have a bit of balance along with everything. Balance is the ensemble of everything. It is how the wine synthesizes as a whole, and I think that is the most important thing to try to convey or to assess in a wine. So that's just something I'm trying to privilege. But I find it sort of, I think in fact this sort of mass tasting context has almost deformed Bordeaux winemaking, because that's how the wines were assessed. And you had to. It's weird. It's like sort of it's like professional bodybuilding versus just going to the gym. you get into a very sort of peculiar place if you really go down that rabbit hole and accept those sort of parameters of judgment.
Yeah, akin to your monster truck analogy, which I do like, actually. That's funny.
That's,
Didn't think they had monster trucks out there in Europe as well. So,
well, they have things that they think are trucks, but they've never been to Texas.
So it's not just me here. There's just questions that are coming in, and I got two that with hands raised. I'll call on, or I'll read this one because it was a direct message from Shantanu Agwal, with similar to something I asked. With pricing in Burgundy, having reached levels, unobtainable levels, or just access to the wines. Have they? It's improperly questioned here. With pricing in Burgundy, haven't reached levels to obtainable levels, or just access to the wines. Not really sure what he's going at there. Is there any pressure to stop reviewing certain producers to make way for more accessible producers?
I don't know. I mean, when I started reviewing Arnaud Lachaud, it was an accessible producer with the 2015. So I don't know. Time moves fast in Burgundy, and I mean, you're going to see things that you're going to see Lafarge, Thomas Boulet, producers like that. They're going to explode. Henri Germain. One can say goodbye to it almost. It's a pity. It's a pity, but it's hard to know. We have these tiny estates.
It's a funny thing though too, when you suggest you put your report out and you have some under the radar producers, and then literally within days they're no longer under the radar. So
yeah,
the accessibility goes away so fast when they're once they're exposed by a trustworthy reviewer. It's like, okay, now we need more, because those guys are gone and unattainable now as well. So.
Right, and a lot of it I consider that I've done has almost been low hanging fruit. Because something like Duroy Gential, everyone knew it was good for a long time. Even the RVF and some of these sort of French magazines and whatnot gave good reviews and so have you. But it was still the case that when I started reviewing Duroy Gential, either from the UK or the US importers, there was sort of 5 or 6 back vintages in stock, and now it's allocated. It just happens like that. And so, but I don't know. Yeah, this is one of the abiding paradoxes. I continue to think there's value in wine criticism as a way to break vicious cycles, especially in places like the Côte Chalonnaise or the satellites of Saint-Emilion. There are all manner of places where there are people who want to do interesting things and who can't because their appellations are unvalorized and they don't get recognition by a press that is too hidebound by scoring by the traditional hierarchy. But the press, I think the wine press can be a great disruptor. It can add a lot of value to the conversation. But it is I don't know what to say really. Sometimes when I see some of these things, it's far from being the case that it's purely driven by scores as well. A lot of market dynamics going on.
Yeah, in this case, Burgundy is not driven by scores. It's driven by its own rarity, really, because so much of it is inaccessible. And when something that is presented as under the radar but worth pursuing, production's low, everyone just jumps on it, and then so therefore it's gone. Like, it goes so fast because the demand is not. And
rich people seem not to be stingy anymore. I think there are a lot of very wealthy people buying these wines now who don't have a sort of historically tethered sense of what the price is.
Yeah.
And if you no longer think I always bought Rousseau Chambertin for $250 a bob, and now it's 500, that's outrageous, I'm not paying it. If you just think I just want Rousseau Chambertin, what's the price? I have X money and the Chambertin is 0.0000, whatever percent of it. They just don't care, and they just buy it. They don't actually. So there's no, the prices are not negotiated. People make up a number. And I see this going on in Burgundy. I see some of these offers that come out from some of the traders here, and it's like they're just making up numbers, Yeah. And I, in many cases, know the X domain price. And you're looking at something like, what does Conche from the estate is what, is it 57 and 47, something like that.
Wow.
And now that bottle, suddenly last time I looked at Wine Central, people were telling me it's 800 last time. I thought it was 600. I remember when it was 250, I bought my wife her first bottle of Cocherie to taste because she'd never had Coche, and it cost me 210 UK pounds sterling. And I thought that was, wow,
So much, yeah.
Yes. Okay, I would be a buyer for a case at that price now, though.
Yeah.
too little, too late. Well, I have a little bit, so it's okay. It's okay.
Okay. Well, I am going to bring Sean. You were first. You were, as always. Whoops, I did it wrong for you. Sorry, I'm trying to unmute you first. I lowered your hand too quick. There you go, buddy.
Thank you. Good to see you, William. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Beautiful. So I know, like you said, you've been farming a little parcel for a couple of years. This is kind of, I guess, a broad question, but can you maybe talk about a couple of things that you've like learned or that were surprised by, and maybe that's kind of informed the way you write or the things that you think about when you taste and review wines of your own?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, I'm very happy to talk about that. I mean, I think the big thing is that when you're actually responsible for a parcel of vines, you have to go into every aspect. You know, when I want to replace dead vines, and I took over a parcel that had about 25-30% dead vines, been treated with herbicides. You know, there was, pretty much everything was wrong. So what do? You know, I had to look into selection Mazal, I had to look into rootstocks, which are the best nurseries in France to get young vine plants from, when to plant them, how to cultivate the soils, fertilizers, composts, treatments, all of these things, pruning. You know, I learned to prune, and it's absolutely fascinating. Honestly, I could retire from wine criticism today and just prune vineyards, and I would actually be quite happy. I would probably wouldn't have such a good wine budget unless. And so it's been great, and I think what the sum of all of that has been to transform the way I look at vineyards. From vineyards for me are no longer scenery, but something you read. You know, and so it's like, oh, pretty picture. You often see that people posting pictures of vineyards, and it's like, oh, you can see all the stones. Yes, it's because they use pre-emergent herbicides. But that, you know, you can see the terroir in a sense, but fantastic. You know, so you need to be able to decode all of the things that you can see, and that's been transformative for me. You know, now I go to visit chateau, and I have good maps. You know, I have a friend who's an architecte de France, which means even on the French cadastre, you can't find out the proprietor unless you have this sort of architect certification. So I can actually find out, thanks to this friend's help, who's the proprietor on the cadastre. So I can go and independently look. No one can show me the neighbor's vines and say these are my vines because they look good. You know, I do this regularly before harvest in Burgundy. I've done exactly the same thing in Bordeaux, and you can see so much. You know, you see the sort of the bare herbicided warm soil and the grapes sort of slightly desiccating in the sun, and you know what the flavors, the exact flavors that sort of low acid, high potassium, sort of slightly sugary, sweet sort of flavor. Some people like it. You know, these sort of things. You can almost reverse engineer the wine by looking at the fruit. So that's been amazing, and I think I get better at that. And you even get the sense of like, what would you do? What is this site? What's this going to bring? What would you have to avoid in winemaking? You know, you're in Allocation, and there's a ton of red clay and these big limestone slabs, and you think, well, okay, you know, this is somewhere where you really wouldn't want to do too much extraction, versus you're in a sort of prime spot like Chambord-Charme, you can extract as much as you'd like. You can. So it's very interesting. It completely transforms everything. I wish I'd done it sooner. Oh, sorry, my camera's getting moved by my child. One of them. I don't know that. Yeah, it's completely transformed how I wish I understand wine and vineyards, and I wish I'd done it much sooner. Honestly, I think it should be almost obligatory. I consider that when I started writing about wine, I didn't really know anything about wine. Today, with what I know.
That's a beautiful answer. And I already wrote down your quote of the day here. Vineyards are no longer scenery, but something you read. I love that. That's amazing. Good job.
Thanks.
I'd make a bumper sticker out of that. All right, Glenn, you're up next.
Mute, Grant.
There we go.
Howdy. Lovely to see and talk to you there, William. This is a question that came up because of a conversation I was having with a friend last night. It's very possible there's alcohol involved, so this might not be as profound a question as it seemed last night. He is in advertising, and yet he is not evil. But he is his charge right now is to how to try to get people in their 20s excited about wine again. And over the course of our dinner, I kind of brought up the idea that wine is it's one of the few beverages you sort of need an education. You almost need to get a graduate degree to really know when you walk into a restaurant what you're going to be getting when you ask for a certain bottle, and what to accept and what to reject, and what your taste profile is like. It's not, you need a lot longer runway before you can successfully continually order wines. And the thing is, you know, I study history for a living, and I love doing research, but a lot of people don't do that. Have you had any thoughts about what it is, or is it even on your radar about people in their 20s and their relationships with wine, because you do a lot of education?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I hear what you're saying, absolutely. You know, equally, I meet sort of people that I mean, somebody when it was at Le Paulet in New York the other day, a 26-year-old from Singapore came up to me and said, "Thank you for enlightening us about the wines of Gewürztraminer and the Mackinac, things like that." And so I'm not worried. Probably the inverse, actually. I'm not worried about sort of, you know, the most interesting wines of the world losing a clientele because of generational change. On the contrary, I think it's one of those things that takes time, absolutely, as you say, and a lot of sort of embedded capital and resources, and making mistakes. You know, I mean, some of the most valuable things I've learned about wine from bottles that I bought that I didn't like, and that cost quite a bit of money sometimes. I try to retain that perspective. I try to buy a lot of the wines that I review well, and so I'm exposed to what happens if I'm wrong as well. But no, I don't know. I'm pretty optimistic. There's never been more information. If you think, imagine when, say, Robert Parker was learning about wine in the late 60s, 70s. How little information there was about wine today, and you know, if you want to try to find out about Chateau Rayas today, you know, you can find photographs of everything, even on the Wine Berserkers forum. You can find videos in the vineyard that people have done. You can see a video of Emmanuel Renaud crushing the grapes in harvest and talking about why he doesn't like carbonic maceration, things like that. I mean, it's incredible. You know, the resources are there, and an awful lot of it is free. The wines themselves are ever more expensive, of course. That's the challenge. But no, I don't know. I think, yeah, I feel more rather optimistic about it. I think as people get, you know, it takes time, and it's not necessarily something that 18-year-olds are going to be starting the way that I did. Yeah. But no, I think, yeah, I'm pretty upbeat about it. And I don't really think, I mean, I think we've been talking mainly about the problem of wines being too expensive. So I'm certainly not in a position where I'm going to start complaining about people not being interested in wine. I think the big problem actually we have is not enough of the stuff people are interested in.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Guillermo, let me unmute you here, and you're next.
And thank you, William. I have two questions that are not nearly as profound as the prior questions. The first one is, in some of your Bordeaux notes, you reference other recent vintages for which you have not published notes. Yeah. And so we have Lisa's notes, and yet you say, well, this will be perhaps better than prior years, but then when you go check, we don't know your impression of the prior year. Do you plan to publish those and maybe a note regarding that? The other question is, I really appreciated your note for the 2021 Calon Segur because it mentioned what seems like an unusually low alcohol by volume in these days. But do you know any other houses that achieve that? What's your impression on that?
Well, let's do it in reverse order. Calon is particularly low because Calon is in fact a rather precocious site. You wouldn't think it because it's to the north, but Saint-Estèphe has some of the most precocious earlier ripening terroir in Medoc. So Calon, now they've been reducing yields and really improving things in the vineyard. The alcohols have been getting quite high quite easily. They're working on that, but 2021 is especially low relative to those standards. But in general, 2021 is a low alcohol vintage in Bordeaux, and that's true across the board. You know, people who really tried could hit 14.5 maybe, but the majority of people are sitting at around 12.5, 13. In some cases without chaptalization, but often with a bit of chaptalization, saignée and osmosis. But you know, in general, it's a moderate alcohol vintage. To address your first question, I mean, I think what I decided, in fact, the condition almost upon which I was prepared to take over reviewing Bordeaux was that I would not say that I like wines that I didn't, because it's just not possible. It's not authentic. It's not helpful to anyone. And I was also committed to attempting the recalibration of the scale that I evoked in my opening remarks, which is to say that, the idea that only 10 years ago we were talking about 2009, 2010 as the greatest vintages in Bordeaux's history. A lot of those claims were made. And today people are unhappy to receive those scores, those same scores that they received in those vintages for a vintage which is middling to poor in some cases. This seems to me sort of a situation we need to get back from. So I took on this project with that in mind, and there's obviously going to be a sort of bit of a transition, which has will leave people who are looking for harmony in the universe a little uncomfortable for a little while. But I think it will take a few years to get everything. The French have an expression, to put the church back in the center of the village. So to restore coherence will take a little bit of time. And for now, yes, you'll see 2018s with higher scores and 2019s, even though the 2019s are better. But I apologize for that. And we're working on it. But I think it was just time to put an end to this sort of insane flurry, especially of scores between, let's say, the real problem for me was so many scores between 98 and 94, let's say. That space was just far too crowded for consumers to be able to say which wine is the best. And if you're in a situation where you can line up 10 98-point wines, and you can pick a clear favorite and you can pick a clear least favorite, well, clearly those wines don't all deserve the same score. That's my approach, is to try to I try to be as hard of myself to say, is this really as good as this? And if so, it should be slightly lower. And we try to position it so people can really see what I think. That's the ultimate objective. And then you can disagree, which is also great. And I try to reason my tasting notes and say, I like it. Look at my tasting note. A perfect example of this, my tasting note on the 2021 Brenet de Cru. I explain exactly why that wine is better than you would think it would be, and what's going on at Brenet, and all of the qualities of that wine that make it compelling to me. And so you have my opinion, and you have the reasoning, and then you can make your judgment, which you absolutely shouldn't be very healthy. I might quickly unclip my microphone and turn on the light. Otherwise,
you're about to be in. I was just about to say you're about to be in a closet level of darkness here, and we'll just be
out of the blue into the black,
seeing nothing, just a voice from the distance. Okay, I got to ask a question on behalf of Charlie Fu next. But the rest of you, if you want to raise your hand, remember to use the reactions. Oh, look at this! Let there be light. If you have questions, use the reactions and raise hand if you like. I just got another one to ask as well. So,
all right.
So
if I sit like this, I can get a halo.
Yeah, it does. We need a choir, please, to sing in the background.
The children may supply that.
Charlie Fu is driving. He wanted to ask this question exactly as it is written. Why does 19 Arnaud Lachaux taste like natty Burgundy?
I don't know. I can't afford to drink it anymore, so I don't know what it tastes like. Charles is using a lot of whole bunch, and he's not doing much in the way of punch down. So there is a sort of intracellular fermentation quality to the wine. So, and there's not much new oak. There's less and less new oak, almost none. But you're going to see that this is a domain in huge evolution, and that in fact it's rather funny. The Becky Westman, the late great Becky Westman's website has a little producer profile on the show written by one of Becky's sons, I forget which, and it says, at lunch in such and such a year we tried to tell William Kelley that in 2015 that Arnaud Lachaux was the best new producer in Burgundy. He didn't agree, but now he does, or something like that. But I found it slightly amusing, because clearly there was a huge step change in 18 stylistically. 19 is sort of 18.5 for Charles. And then in 2020, you're going to see, because the Elevage is going to be like 2 years. There's no new oak pretty much. There's a lot of ceramic. I mean, everything is changing every year. And so Charles is really finding his way and trying a lot of different things, different things in the vineyard. I mean, everything changed in the vineyards in 1819, especially 19, in terms of no hedging, no till. So yeah, I mean, it's demanding constant evolution. And 19 is just one snapshot of what you're going to see a journey. I think 20 you're going to maybe see wines. Already 19's had longer macerations than 18, but you're going to see in 20 again. I mean, I think the tendency of most people in winemaking over time, apart from sort of people who go off the deep end and go AWOL, is actually towards making more sort of classic wines. I mean, someone like Jean-Louis Chave started out really sort of pushing things and has toned things down and so on. And you can think of countless examples like that across the wine world. And I think you're going to see, which it's going to be really interesting to follow that. And unfortunately, very few people are going to get to see the results at this stage.
Okay. I just told him, I just texted him that you answered the question. I'll have him listen in.
I hope more or less.
Or whatever this is, so he can hear his answer directly. Icy Lou has a question. While I'm sure there's a lot, but what are a couple of things with regards to vinification that you are paying more attention to when you make your domain visits, having made your own wine?
I think I'm more aware of the little details and their importance, as opposed to sort of, what percentage of new oak, what percentage of stems, which are kind of the standard questions. When did you pick? What percentage of whole cluster? How much new oak is kind of the question you ask. I'm interested to know how often you rack. Do you rack protecting the wine with gas, or do you rack it oxygenating it? What is your target free sulfur for bottling? When do you make your sulfur additions over the course of the year? How long is your maceration? But also, do you add enzymes? Do you heat at the end? The question is, it's not always easy to get a frank answer to. It should be added, of course. But those little details, wine, everyone likes to reduce wine to these sort of decisive decision points, to continue with my Chocolat analogy, decision points. And in fact, yes, there are moments like that, especially due to when you harvest. But beyond that, I think there's an awful lot which is just a sort of accumulation of details that either magnify the wine or diminish it. And you can start out with something beautiful, and you can easily lose almost everything that's interesting about a wine while still producing a commercially acceptable wine just by doing the wrong thing to it. In my view, everyone has a different view about what's the appropriate thing to do. So also, I'd say the other big thing that making wine has taught me is to, I really try to take my own advice and keep my own counsel. And my ideas about winemaking, if people ask me my opinion, yes, I say, and look, there's some ones that's sort of flagrantly badly done in terms of, particularly extraction or oak barrel choices. I would say choices of oak rather than quantity generally, that you have to say something. But I really try not to be saying, well, you should have, you need to use 100% whole bunch on this, or you need to. I'd rather play with those, with my ideas, with my own wines, and not try to make other people's wines from my armchair via the wine, which is just not, it's just not. That's really the opposite of what I want to bring to the wine conversation.
If you're delving that deep into the questions and into the winemaking process, when you're making these domain visits, you're going to have to be speaking to the winemakers now, not just domain representatives.
Yeah, well, that's how you find out who actually knows. Also,
right.
If you ask someone in Bordeaux, how many parts per million dissolved CO2 do you keep in your whites when you bottle? What's your target? Like CO2. You may be speaking to somebody who is actually in marketing. You may be, so you find, but it's also a way to sort of break the ice with these people, because they're used to meeting frankly so many idiots that you get the sort of poker face, and the real challenge when you make a visit to, you've never been, especially in Bordeaux, where they see this pretty sort of institutionalized, this whole sort of press circus, is to try to break through that ice. And you have asking very technical questions is a good way to do that sometimes. I had a big conversation with Vincent at Kelley about Brett. He did his whole doctoral research on Brett cells, and he discovered that 19th century Bordeaux, you open them and they're still living or dormant but living viable Brett cells in the bottle, for example. The durability of this stuff through time is remarkable. And you get into questions like that with somebody, and suddenly they forgive you for giving them 93 and saying the wine's a bit alcoholic or whatever. It's important. I mean, that's been the very passionate and exciting thing about covering Bordeaux is those sorts of connections, thanks to being able to talk about technique.
Yeah, that's great. Now we have Christian. I'm going to unmute you now, and you are good to go.
Yeah, thank you, Todd, for organizing. Thank you, William, for participating. I really appreciate your writing. And since the discussion was mostly about Burgundy and Bordeaux, I'm thinking of switching direction a little bit. Are you thinking, or are you drinking Piemontese wines? Are you thinking of writing about them? What's your thinking in general about the region? Many Burgundy lovers tend to like Piemonte as well, but
I have very controversial views about such subjects, and I must disclaim I do not speak ex cathedra. My opinions are not representative of those of my esteemed colleague Monica Lagana and whatever. But I tend to think that obviously there are some similarities between Piemonte and Burgundy in that they have lots of little vineyards with different expositions and whatnot, and they've all been cut up and they've been given names. But beyond that, I think the comparison ends because you're looking at a very hot place with huge diurnal shift, which is in some ways the opposite of Burgundy at its best, and a great variety, which makes these huge clusters that for me have more in common with Zinfandel than with Pinot Noir in terms of the size of the cluster. Now, one of the hallmarks of sort of so-called noble varieties, people, why is it noble? Well, it's because, historically it was because only wealthy people could afford to plant such things because they didn't make very much volume, So it just has a historic origin. It's not making a judgment. It's just a fact of history. And Pinot makes these tiny clusters. Nebbiolo makes these horrid things, and they're vast with these big shoulders. And you can imagine there are green ones, there are pink ones, there are red ones. There's everything. I mean, it reminds me, I can barely drink Zinfandel still after having sorted it when I worked harvest in Napa Valley one year, because you overripe on one side, underripe on the other, and then filled with white spiders, things like that. I mean, and Nebbiolo sort of reminds me of that when I see it, and I think that's expressed. Obviously, some of that's agronomic. It's you can farm any vine in such a way that you make smaller or bigger clusters and so on. A lot of these things are pumped full of nitrogen, and sort of almost everything's done wrong. But the result expresses in tannins that are often very crude and coarse, and that if there's one thing I prize universally in all wines, it is structural refinement, simply because I don't like to be punched in the face, by the wine that I'm drinking. As I say, I prefer in French you say, je prefer de caresse au cou. I prefer to be caressed than smacked in the face, and that's how I characterize it. And the tannins of Nebbiolo I find, and that's again amplified by viticultural practice, and also I think by somewhat rather crude oxidative winemaking in many cases. And who knows so I don't know very much about it. I mean, I love Bellotto's Monvillera, which I find a remarkably perfumed, sensual, aromatic wine. I regret that it is no longer $40 a bottle, but thankfully I've got quite a lot of it. I like old Bruno Giacosa. I find sort of contemporary Quintana, a lot of these wines are sort of these sledgehammer wines that I struggle to drink, and everyone's like, well, it would be fantastic in 50 years. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see. I mean, it's certainly made very differently now than it was 50 years ago. And so a lot of chalk and cheese comparisons in the wine world. They say, oh, well, X Chateau was great in 1955, so the 2005 must be fantastic when it's 50 years old. And not necessarily, I don't know. When everything has changed, in terms of how the vineyards are planted, farmed, and the wines are made, I don't know. I love Bartolo Mascarello. I think there must be a huge amount of interest or potential in the Alte Lage. But this is really not my specialist subject, and I've only visited a few times. And I probably I don't know. I have maybe 50, 60 bottles of Piemontese wines in my cellar, which is really not very much. But I think they're all good. I think they're all good for the most part. So at least I've got a lot of old Giacosa white labels from before those, because everyone wanted the red labels. And I was spared. I would have bought the red labels too, because I was a fool, but I was a student as well as a fool, and I didn't have enough money to buy the red labels, so I bought a lot of the white labels. So now I'm quite happy to have those.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have questions? Otherwise, we can let him perhaps finally go to bed. Last call on questions.
For the dig my grave with Italian wine lovers.
Yeah, I know. And the information you've shared on Zinfandel, the monstrous clusters, and
oh well, I have some Zinfandel in my cellar in Beaune. Could you believe it? I don't know how many people in Beaune have a lot of Zinfandel, but I have a few bottles.
Like American Zinfandel, or or Primitivo or something, you know. Italian.
No, I mean French Zinfandel. What do you think? Yeah?
Well, I know, but I mean, variants of Zinfandel, such as whatever Primitivo or
yeah, no. I've got some older
Drag, or
I've got some older Ridge and some older William Sellium Zins. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
But,
Okay.
no.
Okay. Well, two.
It looks like there are two more. Well, let's do it. Let's do it. I've not finished the decanter yet, so.
That's good. All right, Richard. I'm gonna ask you to unmute. You're up, Richard Frankel.
Thanks, Todd. Hey, William. To give you the opportunity to talk about something that you are a little more familiar with, I thought I would ask about Champagne. I've loved a lot of your writing there, and the discussion about Bordeaux and transformations in how vineyards are cared for, combined with the sort of the structure of massive players and then lots of little ones who are coming up, made me think of Champagne. And I wonder if you could talk about, I'm curious if you see the same kinds of changes that you've been seeing in Bordeaux in terms of vineyard management quality happening in Champagne similarly, and some of your thoughts on the subject.
There's a lot going on, there's a lot going on, and much of it positive. I think people have realized that the writing is on the wall about glyphosate, and that they're going to have to stop being herbicide dependent in their farming. They're trying to get ahead of the curve. So a lot of the big players have stopped doing that. It's now, people like Franken, Pommery Franken, are now trying to sort of go into organic conversion and so on. So suddenly you see a lot less of the sort of, nuclear wasteland sort of scenery in Champagne in the spring than you did even 3-4 years ago. I didn't ever imagine it would be such a rapid or transformational change, in fact, in that regard. You start to see, apparently, a friend of mine who lives in IE told me that there are now fish in the river again, which is like a modest thing, but it gives you a sense of the extent to which agrochemicals were sort of pouring into the water, of sort of nitrogen fertilizer prompting algal bloom, and then all the herbicides and pesticides sort of draining in and killing everything and creating sort of oxygen-free water and what have you. And there were no fish, and now there are fish in the river again. So there's a lot of good stuff going on. I think what is between Bordeaux or Champagne as to which region has the most hectares in organic conversion. But the fact remains that there are a lot of challenges in Champagne in terms of getting the grapes picked, and then the people are looking at changing the cahier de charge to have lower densities of plantation, higher vineyards. I think there are a lot of people who'd like to readapt the vineyards of Champagne to permit machine harvesting. Of course, if you harvest by machine, you can't do the traditional Champagne pressing, which is sort of so fundamental to the process, which is this very gentle pressing of whole bunches, which creates musts that are low in sugar and very, very low in phenolics compared to, if you machine harvesting crushes the grapes, or at least breaks all the grapes off the bunch in order to be picked by the machine, So it would sort of be quite transformative for Champagne, some of these things, and people are looking at this. It's not being hugely reported on because it's a somewhat technical subject. It's something to be aware of. So I don't know. I mean, that you have, that's never some producers like Egli-Uria and Salasa whatever are never going to go that route. So there's nothing to worry about there. But who knows? Yeah, who knows what the sort of, there's this whole segment of the Champagne market. It's just sort of Champagne from not very good sites that doesn't cost very much money and doesn't taste very nice. And so what's the future of that? There's a great future for great Champagne, as there is for all great wine. But what's the future for these sort of mediocre little wines? And how much, how many marketing dollars do you need to pour at such things to make them palatable to people? These are big questions, and you see that wherever you are, whether it's the Petit Chateau of Bordeaux or the Beaujolais or the Côte Chalonnaise or really anywhere. I mean, Languedoc-Roussillon, all over France is sort of the real problem the problem is not the expensive wines. Expensive wines are never sold better. The real challenge is for anything that's under like €7 a bottle or €10 a bottle, whatever. The cheap stuff is where the problems are and where the big sort of challenge is going to be. How do you farm organically in a humid place, for example, and sell your wine for a very low bottle price? So there are big concerns. But generally, I would say Champagne is dynamizing, not to the extent. There's a lot less freedom, in Champagne you're only really allowed to prune one way. The densities historically, it was all very regulated, and it's just one appellation, remember. So in Bordeaux you have different rules between Pauillac, Saint-Julien, Saint-Estèphe to some extent and they can be changed, and that permit producers to try to play around with different things potentially. With Champagne, it's just one AOC, which is of course the origin of that is to facilitate blending stuff from anywhere with stuff from everywhere. But the downside is that everyone has to play by exactly the same rules, and they are somewhat limiting. So, and then I think the changes that people want to make to them might not be in the good direction potentially. But we'll see what happens. It's a bit early to say.
Thank you, Guillermo Mena. You're next.
Thanks again. I rarely get a second chance to do this stuff, so at least we have a little bit of wine left. I asked about Bordeaux first. Let me ask about Burgundy and the oxymoron of affordable Burgundy. I know you've said that one of the producers that you highlighted as affordable quality is DMO. Do you have any others that you particularly feel are still flying under the radar and are specifically like something that we should all seek out if we are, seeking value, but a really good bottle of wine?
Yeah, I mean, I write about this a lot. I think Didier Fournereau, who's going to retire soon, that's something that I'm trying to stock up a lot. I think it's kind of crazy. The guy's coming up in his 60s, I think, already. So this amazing career, used to make the wines at Dimendalo, and just sort of, he got some nice reviews in the late 80s from Bob, and then I don't know who's been reviewing the wines or if anyone's been reviewing. I saw we reviewed them in between once and misspelled Rue de Foin as Rue de Fion, which translates as Ass Street, which is now one of the more amusing typos in our database, in fact, which I have not yet corrected. I really ought to remedy that. But they're great. You age those wines for 10, 15 years. You serve them blind. They're very agreeable young. They have to be. An appellation like that, if you can't afford to make wines that don't quite tasty young, but age 10, 15, you have an incredible bottle in your hands, which embarrasses all manner of things.
Could you type that? Could you type that name? Because my French is very bad.
Oh well, I can. I'll put it in the thread or something afterwards because I'm not sure I've mastered. I'm not. But Fournereau, Didier Fournereau, and what else? I tasted today was Boris Champy, someone who's revitalized an already kind of interesting domain, but just brought a lot more polish to the winemaking and precision to the viticulture. Boris Champy took over Didier Monchevaux's domain in Nantou, in the Haute Côte. Very interesting stuff coming out of that. And I think in terms of the bang for your buck, you're getting stuff like Bruno Laurençon, Vincent Deroy, Jean-Marc Vincent. These are some of my sort of favorites I've been talking about for a little while now. So I'm beginning to. This is something what wine critics have to come to terms with, I guess. Is like you start to become boring because you're saying the same things, which is unfortunate. Cyril Adouin in Marseille, there's a lot. There's actually a lot there, but you're not going to get. And to me, this is the least interesting bit about Burgundy is like finding a value Richebourg or a value Bonmar. If I want to drink Richebourg, I want to drink La Luz, or DRC's, or whatever. I don't want to drink a value Richebourg per se. I don't want to have the cheapskate worst version of a great vineyard. I want somebody who's doing. It's the same reason I almost invariably never buy Bordeaux second wines. There'll be some those sort of glitches in the matrix when I might consider buying a book. I just don't want someone's second effort, or third effort. I want the sort of best thing. So, but you have to, and I think this is another, to revert to one of the themes that we had this evening, one of the things that I learned from making a little bit of wine is that there's an awful lot of magic in Burgundy, but equally there's a lot of that magic exists in our imagination, you know. And if you do a lot of blind tasting, and if you farm vineyards and you look at and you walk the vineyards, and you can live with only drinking Richebourg a few times a year. You don't, you know, and you can live with drinking very, very delicious wine from places that are not called Richebourg, that in a blind tasting people think could be Richebourg, you know. Because if you understand a bit more about the work behind it, it sort of demystifies it a bit. There's a lot of mystique in wine, and in the sort of what goes into making a wine profound. I think for me, you know, you can never disassociate the vineyard from its interpreter, and the Bordeaux first growth in many ways exemplify that actually better than some of the situations in Burgundy where everything is sort of attributed to the terroir, even if it isn't entirely the case. But you know, the real success of the first growth, or something like the RC, that's I would say, is in fact their capacity to have preserved and cultivated an aesthetic identity over time to produce a distinctive characteral expression from a place, which is predicated on the place of what the place gives you, absolutely. But it's about having aesthetic vision, you know. And this is why one of the things I find lacking in contemporary wine criticism is like, well, this wine is well made. I had this discussion with the Saint-Emilion producer, and I said, you know, what do you score a choucroute out of 100 if you don't like boiled cabbage and sausage? And then, well, if it's well done, it should be, you know. But look, are we not allowed to say that a Dover is better than a choucroute? I mean, come on, we have to be able to make aesthetic judgments and have aesthetic preferences, and to discuss it. The music is not good because the musicians know how to play, you know. So this is something I think we need to, as wine writers, maybe embrace having taste. Champion that, defend it, explain it, articulate it, and that would be good. And I think producers, the most successful wine producers of the world, are those for me that have very distinctive aesthetic in addition to everything else that they do. So whether you're looking at Soldera or, you know, the Glorieuses of Bruno Giacosa, having disparaged Italian wines, I should cite some that I actually like, or you know, Briand, Lafite, or DRC, or whatever, or Cocherie. You know, these are people who make wines that have an absolutely very intimate and strong relationship with the place where they come from. Let's put it like that. But then are absolutely artistic, in terms of being stylized, being crafted, being patinated, even if sometimes the producers think that they're not doing anything, you know. But their taste, all the choices we make, if they're informed by our taste, reflect our taste. So the, you know, it's inescapable almost. You know, wine, if it's made fearlessly and without, you know, reference to sort of endogenous, whether it's external consultants or too many enology classes, whatever, wine is actually autobiography like everything else, you know. That was Benedetta Croce said all historical writing is autobiography, which when at my time as an historian was a quotation I liked, because I saw, you know, I was reading all these history books throughout the years and seeing that is essentially true. We reflect ourselves in what we do, and wine is absolutely the same.
Thank you, William. That's a wonderful, I think, wrap up for us all. If you don't mind so much. So I would very much appreciate if you could put some of those producers. I know you have written about them, but do put those producers in the thread would be fantastic. And I've pulled a few of my favorite quotes that you've given, and I'm going to put them in a thread as well. I particularly love the Richebourg quote. So
hey, and you did a good job of getting me to say some indiscreet things, which will,
I did. Okay, good.
No doubt make me more enemies in the Gironde.
No, there won't be more enemies. No, not for you. I don't think so. I think you're far too likable, I think, to have enemies. So, so I thank you for your time here. This has been recorded, and I will post it for everyone to see who has not been able to be here because of work day, etc. And to all, I wish a wonderful weekend, and thanks for joining us. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for having me. And
thank you, William.
Cheers.
Cheers.